God, it's a Belgian quad.
Are you going to be falling out of your chair by the end of the
Oh,
broadcast?
this is going to be brilliant. I'm so fucked tonight.
Great. We
If
just
it's
went
any
live
good,
and you're
because
swearing already.
huh?
I said we just went live. You're swearing already.
You can edit it. We're not looking for any particular rating, are we?
No, and that won't end up in the published podcast, so we're cool. So anyone who's tuning in, maybe not live, but whatever. If you're watching us on YouTube,
ish,
we're busy discussing what beer we're drinking tonight. Jason thinks he'll be falling out of his chair by the end of the night.
Oh, we're starting off with the dirty little freak.
I've got me a campfire stout. This thing is really tasty. From High Water Brewing. Only 6.5%, but you know what? I don't need crazy ABV to enjoy a beer.
This one's 5.8, but this other one is a quad, so I can't imagine that it's going to be. So I think you'd like this. This is oh, I thought it said it on here somewhere. Yeah. Roasted malt, coconut, caramel, chocolate essence, hops.
That does sound tasty.
And just so that you're aware, right on the side there.
Yeah, I can't read that.
There is no safe word.
There it is. There is no safe word. That's good to know. You know, just in case. There's no backing out.
I guess. All right. This is where we do a thing, right? Let's see.
One last tweet to go out, and then I think we're going to get this show on the road.
You can't tweet with your phone. You have to tweet with the Twitter app.
You can't just like throw your phone into the Twitter?
No.
Do you listen to Smashing Security?
I haven't in a while.
The most recent episode, they're talking about the Mandiant breach. And the horrible grammar of the guy of the group that defaced the Mandiant employee's LinkedIn profile. And one of the things they did was they spelled Twitter as tweeter. And one of the hosts on the show caught it and said, "Oh no, they're going to attack our tiny speakers." I thought it was good. Good catch on their part.
It's pretty good.
Okay, I think we can get this thing rolling. Anyone who's not tuned in, which is all of you, we'll just have to watch it later.
Yeah, watch it later.
Watch it later. All right, I think it's time for the intro.
Make with the intro.
Make with the intro. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin podcast, your source for IT news, commentary, and a healthy dose of paranoia. I'm so happy that I found that song, Creative Commons. It makes such a great intro. It's so grown on me. Anyway, welcome to episode 20 of the Iron Sysadmin podcast. I'm your host Nate, and joining me from his basement undisclosed location is Jason.
Yeah, how much have you had to drink already? You're having trouble talking.
I haven't had that much to drink. I'm not having trouble talking. What the heck? I've only had half of this. 3/4 of this pewter mug.
All right.
I'll drink more. It's good.
More beer.
That's what makes the podcast fun, right? Beer?
Well, I thought it was us that made the podcast fun.
No, it's the
It
beer.
was the beer that made us fun.
I don't know.
Russian nesting dolls.
What? Nesting doll? Is that what you said?
Russian nesting dolls. Never mind. It's not as funny if you have to explain it.
It's layers upon layers upon layers. Is that like parfait?
It's like a parfait or an onion.
Right. Right. So yeah, listeners, podcast at ironsysadmin.com. Let us know. Do we make the podcast fun or does the beer?
Are you sure you want that answer?
Or is it? Well, hey, episode 21 will just be this sitting on a shelf.
Right.
For an hour. If people think the beer makes it fun.
Oh, be careful what you tempt people with.
Well, you know, I mean, hey, if that's what the listeners want, I will happily make an episode of some beer sitting on a shelf. I'll get to go to bed early and all right. Anyway, so sorry we missed last week. As you can tell from the fact that I'm speaking, my voice has returned. The weekend before last, I was out with the Jeep Jamboree and I was sick when I went, and I should have known better, but they needed me because other people had already backed out. So I went, you know, duty and all. I had a good time, but yeah, totally lost my voice. When I came back, I could barely talk.
It took his voice several days to crawl its way back from the trail, complaining the entire way that he just left it behind.
It did. It did. I lost it in the woods in Shamokin.
Irresponsible.
Irresponsible. Listen, I've never lost one of my children.
Yet.
My voice is, you know.
Well, losing children is fun. Not that I would know that firsthand.
I'm thinking no, it wouldn't be. We're going to switch subjects before child services come to find either of us. All right, so I guess we'll move right on into the news. How's that sound?
News. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so you've heard of this thing called encryption, right?
Yeah.
And you've heard of like this thing called end-to-end encryption, right?
The end of encryption? Yeah.
No, end to end, as in there are two ends, and the whole thing from one end to the other is encrypted, correct?
Right. We should end encryption because terrorists use it.
Yeah. Right. So, this wonderful politician from the EU, I guess from Britain, is that?
Wait, hang on. Didn't you say something about not talking about politics on the podcast? I'm confused.
So this isn't quite politics. I mean, I guess it could be. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't vote for this person. What I'm saying is Amber Rudd.
I think I can.
No, you can't. I mean, I suppose if you moved and switched your citizenship, you could.
Okay.
Anyway.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Anyway, she thinks that like encryption's bad because, you know, they want to be able to see what you're doing online.
Okay.
This isn't going well, is it?
No. Yeah. Thank you. I'll keep my encryption.
Yeah, I mean, this thread is going on in so many countries around the world. I really more or less included this article as a talking point for pretty much all of the various points in all of the various governments.
You know, the one thing that
they want to be able to see the data you're moving online, which, you know, very, very bad thing for privacy.
But the one thread that seems to roll through all of these wonderful calls to kill encryption is that the person making that request or demand or whatever never seems to have a very good grasp on technology or how it works.
Yeah, that is kind of how this works. It's
This one seems to be. She seems to be, and I don't. Maybe you're an Amber Rudd fan. I don't know. I don't know about her politics or anything. All I know is that I've been hearing on and off of different things that she has said, and I don't know. It seems like she has no clue what encryption is or how it works, other than I can't see what the terrorists are saying, so therefore it's bad.
yeah, and I can understand that angle, right? You want to be able to know what the bad guys are up to so you can preemptively stop the bad guys. I get that. But cutting out everyone else's privacy just so you can find the bad guys, it's the same argument we have for all of the other rights and privileges that people get stripped away from them in the name of public safety.
If you outlaw encryption, the only one that's going to have encryption are the terrorists.
The argument does apply. The only people that you catch by passing laws is the people who obey the laws.
Right.
So, anyway.
Well, I mean, you would argue that you can't catch the person obeying the law because they're, I mean, but I get your meaning.
Yeah, okay.
The only people that lose are the people that obey the law.
The only people that lose are yes, yeah, there. We're not telling you should break the law. But badly written
in
laws
most cases,
only
don't break the law.
Only hurt the people that obey the law. All right, we're going to move on to the next article. This is going downhill fast. Right. All right, so every Linux box you ever logged into has this handy utility called ls, which is sort of short for list. If you ever wondered what ls meant. So did you ever want to just not use ls and use some third-party tool that looked prettier than ls? It sounds, I mean, what could go wrong, right?
No, I mean, no. I'm gonna go with no.
Okay, well, exa, because that's so much easier to type than ls, is a replacement for ls written in Rust.
Well, you could alias ls to exa, and then
I suppose you could, but then ls you wouldn't be able. I've never used the language
replacing ls. So
I've never used the Rust language for anything, but I'm guessing there are supporting libraries.
I'm not sure about Rust. I know. So if you use Go, I have programmed in Go. When you compile a Go program, it actually compiles all the libraries into that one program, so that you don't have to install that sort of stuff.
It's more like a compile
for the most part. Rust, I'm not sure of.
It does say that it does specifically say that it's portable in here. So
all right.
So anyway, it does look neat. I'll say, like looking at the screenshots from the Tech Mint article that we put in the show notes. But I don't see a need. It adds some. It adds some color coding. It adds some better headers and whatnot. But
I have color coding in LS.
So do I. But this, like, the columns are colored, and it does look a little easier to read. The permissions are color coded. I mean,
cool, is it easier to read?
I guess it depends on your eyesight, but
well, it's pretty. It's pretty. It's different. It's pretty. If it's your thing, great, cool.
In the same way that syntax highlighting isn't for everybody, but it's for a lot of people, right? Some people hate syntax highlighting. A lot of people like it because it makes their code easier to read.
I love syntax highlighting.
Programming. Yeah, so do I. I was telling you before the show, this reminds me of there were, back in the DOS days, before I got into Linux, there was a replacement for DOS's dir command, which basically looked a whole lot like ls, but except there was some nice coloring. This very much reminds me of that.
Yeah, I'm pretty much not finding anything on Google for a DOS dir replacement.
Yeah, well, good luck finding it now.
Well, I asked Google, and Google has all the answers. Okay,
listen,
Google didn't come back with anything, therefore it doesn't exist.
Back in the day when I downloaded this thing, I had to search like 3 or 4 different BBSs to find it. So it's not
Do you
exactly
know
something
how
I
do you know how
downloaded
large my phone bill was in order to find this replacement?
exactly. I mean, I don't think Google existed when I found this thing.
uh, um, it's neat. Some of these come out, and some of them catch on, and some of them don't. It's pretty. It's neat. Good luck replacing LS. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I mean, I don't know that their goal is to outright replace LS like in mass.
yeah,
I think it's just
this is just something that's neat, I guess. I
someone decided to write a utility is what it came down to.
Right. I look at these. I run across these all the time, whether it's replacing LS or something else, and I have found a couple of them that are pretty cool. Matter of fact, Vim has a there's a project called the Ultimate Vim RC, and
Okay.
it's pretty slick. It's got some really neat features. I use it on my local machine, and I don't install it anywhere else because I have to install it everywhere else in order to use it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that really is take all the cool fancy utilities you want, but when you have to deploy it across 300 servers because it's the only way you like to work, then it gets to be a little problematic.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bash replacement. I think it's called Fish. Oh, there it is, Fish Shell. Um, for Mac systems, it's pretty slick. It's got some really neat features. And one of my
Fish?
coworkers, yeah, it's called Fish. One of my coworkers uses it, and
Does it smell funny? Does it swim?
I don't think so. I look. I don't know why it's called Fish. Okay,
Can you
it's
can you
just called
catch it
Fish.
with an invisible piece of string
Maybe,
and a hook?
maybe it's slick.
It's
It's
slick.
really
Okay,
neat.
I'll
It's got
take your
some
word
neat
for it.
features. It would
It,
be
but
really
it's only
cool
for
to use
Mac.
it. Well,
What the
looks
heck?
like they have Windows and Linux versions now as well. When I first looked at it, it looked like it was Mac only, but whatever. So it's cross-platform now. Um, but using something like that, you end up learning different behaviors, and then you get on a regular machine, and usually those behaviors just make you look dumb, and sometimes those behaviors are dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, and it so I tend to avoid only because I can't take the time to put it on every single machine I'm going to deal with.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I can remember back in the day all the various customizations I would do to my Windows 95 machine or whatever to make it behave differently or to make it do things
light
differently than the
light
standard
step,
install. Lightstep.
light
Yeah, I
step.
remember Lightstep. But I mean, like, I had this cool replacement for the command prompt that was called eConsole,
Yep.
which did like transparent backgrounds and it did animated cursors and like all kinds of fancy crap that really didn't matter. But I got used.
Enlightenment for the Windows machine.
Yeah, right. But the point was I got used to it, right? On my own machine. And then when I went to someone else's machine and didn't have it, it's like now this powerful thing that I was using, or just this neat thing, or whatever, wasn't there. Right. So now you had to go back to the old way, you know,
Right.
of doing something, and sometimes you'd get rusty or whatever. So I mean, in a case like a replacement for LS, that's probably not going to be as big of a deal because it should be easy enough to fall back to LS.
Right.
Right. But if it's a whole shell and the shell isn't everywhere, then yeah, I could see how that could be
Yeah.
a problem.
I use all sorts of different tools on my machines. But when it comes to command line, I tend to just stick with whatever's, you know, generally used on the boxes that I manage. Only because I have to use it to manage the boxes anyway. And hey, they've lasted this long. They're pretty decent. They work.
Yeah. So anyway, if you want a replacement for LS that adds some extra color and apparently is quite compatible with the usual command lines you'd pass into LS, it only takes you like 3 steps to install,
It's pretty.
and it's pretty.
I'll give them that.
Excellent.
It is pretty.
EXA. Go look it up if you want it.
It's looks like it's at version 0.7, if that tells you anything.
0.7. Man.
Ooh, it does trees too. Look at that.
Oh, good.
And it does. I can't figure. Oh no, that's LS. So that's his prompt that's doing that. All right, never mind. My prompt does that too.
Fancy prompt. All right, moving on to an article from Computer World.
Still exists?
Man, yeah, it wasn't. This was a magazine back in the day, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Magazine.
I mean, I sort
Are
of
they still a
assume it still
magazine?
was.
Maybe they are. I don't know.
Maybe.
Anyway, I just remembered leafing through Computer World looking for like computer parts and whatever. Anyway,
no, wasn't that? Are you talking about Computer Shopper?
no, Computer Shopper was like the novel or like phone book sized
Yeah. Okay.
catalog that would come, you know, even whether you asked for it or not. But no, magazines like Computer World always had ads in them for various things, including full computer systems and whatnot.
Right.
Back in the day when, you know, I was this punk kid with no driver's license that looked for computer parts instead of for car parts. Anyway,
Cars. Nobody drives cars anymore.
so
Nobody
there's
wants to drive cars anymore.
yeah, I do. I actually like driving. Am I one of those weird people that like driving? Everybody else wants to let their car do it for them.
My kids have like almost no interest, or kind of having to
well,
force them to get licenses.
Your kids are messed up.
Yes, I hear it's not an uncommon thing though.
Well, look on the bright side. You'll save on insurance, and you'll be less likely to have your children in some sort of a terrible car accident because they were busy texting and driving.
Right, and I can be an Uber driver for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's the downside.
Yep.
So anyway, on to Computer World. Now that we've digressed into stories of old and why children won't drive today.
Damn kids, get off my lawn.
You use automatic updates for any of your workstations or servers?
No, I don't.
No,
I have always erred on the side of thanks, I'll update it myself. I check regularly for patches.
Yeah, so as you may or may not know, since you don't run any Windows boxes at this point, do you?
No, it's wonderful. Let me tell you how incredibly great it is not to run any Windows boxes.
Microsoft is really, really pushing automatic updates, especially for the average end user. And that's really what this article is geared toward. And the reason being that, well, too many people would ignore their updates, and then they'd get hit with all kinds of nastiness. You know, the latest 0 day that rolls around, or the latest like 60-day-old 0 day that rolls around.
Right.
And then Microsoft looks bad because their operating system was so horribly insecure, even though they patched it, you know, 45 days ago or a year ago or whatever, and nobody bothered to apply the patch. So the article, the reason I included it was that they're suggesting that folks like us that know what they're doing and know that patching is good, maybe should turn off the automatic updates, just because the automatic updates may get in your way. You know, they may force you to do an update when you're not expecting it. They may interrupt your work, you know, whatever. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? It sounds like your thoughts on this are exactly you're in agreement with the article. You'd rather tell it to do its updates.
So here's the thing. In the article, it goes into detail about this. If you're not a savvy computer user, automatic updates obviously will make sure that your machine stays up to date. But it's a double-edged sword, especially, you know, and I don't want to be accused of Microsoft bashing or anything, but they don't exactly have a really good track record of pushing out patches that are, let's say, well tested. And I understand how incredibly difficult it is to test every conceivable configuration under the sun. Got it. But they have a habit of pushing out patches that cause more problems than they fix. And it happens a lot. Now, if you are an administrator or somebody who has been working on computers for a while and is pretty good at, handling Windows and figuring things out, you might be a little annoying, but you can work around it. If you're um, Aunt Martha, I think is who they said in the article here,
Yeah, I think
you're
they picked on
screwed.
poor Aunt Martha.
Yeah, I mean, you're done. Like your computer is broke, and then you're going to go pay somebody to fix it because like she's not gonna know what to do. The
Yeah,
other thing
right.
that I've noticed is that, and I'm no longer a regular Windows user and have not been since XP days. Um, but the machines that I've looked at more recently, it still doesn't seem that Microsoft actually pushes out all of the patches. So no matter what machine I look at, there's always some patches that for one reason or another just aren't automatically updated.
Yeah, well, those are so generally the way Microsoft handles them is there are what they consider critical patches, which you can configure it to install those automatically, and then you can have it ignore or not necessarily ignore, but you can have it not automatically install the optional patches. So maybe that's what you're referring to.
Maybe. In a lot of cases, those optional patches are what ends up fixing problems when I'm working with somebody's computer. So maybe we should start making them not optional. But
Yeah, I mean,
whatever.
I don't know what distinguishes optional from not optional, or not optional from critical patches. Probably if they're related to security vulnerabilities and not just feature enhancements.
Yeah, bug fixes and or critical bug fixes and security patches and stuff are probably automatic ones. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. It's not, Microsoft pushed out their creators update a couple of months ago,
Yeah.
and that was that was, I believe, uh, to use a phrase that Jerry from uh, Defensive Sec likes to use. That was pretty much a dumpster fire. Um,
What are you talking about, man? The creators update brought along Ubuntu.
yeah, if your machine still ran after you installed it. So, to the point where Microsoft apparently came out and said, like, yeah, don't install this. It's not ready for prime time.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is like, you know, uh, service packs of old. The old service pack installs. There was always a chance there was going to be a major screw up until they really got all the bugs worked out. So yeah, if you were one of the first adopters of the service pack, yeah, there could be issues until you
Sure,
know
sure,
issues were fixed. So
early adopters.
I
But to be fair, that's sort of what this article is saying. Like, if you have automatic updates, you might be
hmm hmm
forced to do the whole,
Now on the other side of that fence, if you're not checking regularly, even if you know better, you're opening yourself up to an issue here. If you turn off automatic updates, it really comes down to how, like, I may know better, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to be applying the updates as quickly as I'm supposed to, just because I know better,
right.
right? So you start to develop that mindset, like, I'll be fine. I'm a power user. I don't need that update yet. I'll get to it when I get to it, right? And then before you know it, um, the next WannaCry is rolling around, and you haven't patched yet because you'll get to it later, right?
Yeah, I think that's almost an extreme. Like, well, maybe not. That's more of a lazy patching strategy. I put
Well,
all the patches in when they're there. Like, if I
so
get
like
notified there's a patch, I put it in. But
in
I
the case
know that
of
it's happening.
in the case of WannaCry, that was like, I think they said it was like 60 days from
Right.
the point where Microsoft released a patch, or was it 45 days? I think it was 60 days. From the point where Microsoft released a patch to the point where WannaCry rolled around and actually hit people, right? So 60 days is only 2 months. And 2 months sounds like a long time. Like, oh, I can't believe you didn't patch it in 2 months. Well, 2 months flies by when you're just trying to get stuff done.
Right.
You know, you log into your Windows box. You're like, okay, I gotta go set up this Exchange account. Oh, there's updates. I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow it's oh, there's this weird Active Directory thing I need to figure out. Oh, there's updates. I'll do it tomorrow. And before you know, tomorrow is when WannaCry hits,
And then you're
right?
crying.
And then you're crying because your machine got cryptoed, and you need to pay, a couple of Bitcoin to get your data back. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's really in. However, on the flip side, right? You're logging in to fix that Exchange account that someone's screaming about, and all of a sudden you get hit with the equivalent of a service pack that your machine has now forced you to install, and you're dead in the water until it finishes.
Yep.
Right. So it really is like, if you're going to turn off automatic updates, you need to live with that, and you need to accommodate that by making sure that you set aside some time during a day or an evening or whatever to get those patches installed. But if you leave automatic updates turned on because you're not the sort of person that's good at getting your updates installed when you're supposed to, then, well, you're going to have to live with that, right? You're going to have to live with the annoying I'm about to make a presentation in front of a bunch of my peers, and my laptop has picked now to install the creators update.
I thought you could schedule that these days though. Like you can say like install automatic updates, but do it at night.
You can.
Which
So like,
doesn't help if your laptop is off or your
yeah, it's
computer's
like I
off.
set up my laptop to install updates at 3 a.m., but at 3 a.m. my laptop was closed and hibernating in my laptop bag.
Right.
Right. So
Right. Yeah, I don't
at
I don't know
8
what the
a.m. when
rules
I get
are.
to my desk and pop it open and plug it in, it's like, oh, hey, there were updates I should have installed last night at 3 a.m. You want to do them now? No,
And
I got to get this
you
Exchange
say,
account fixed.
no, I'll do it later. And then it kind of does everything in the background and it's all set. And you're like, oh crap, I gotta leave. And you go to turn your computer off, and then please wait, installing updates
Yeah.
for like the next hour.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, whatever. It's a difficult question to answer, but the article makes a case for turn that shit off.
I have a better case. Move to a different operating system.
Yeah, but every operating system needs updates, whether it's Windows or not.
Sure. Seems like everybody else seems to handle it better than Windows, but
You just hate Windows.
Anyway, so
speaking of WannaCry,
yeah.
so you might
So,
remember that this
how was-
security researcher
How was DEF CON?
sort of stumbled across this kill switch in WannaCry that pretty much stopped the spread cold in its tracks. That guy was on Twitter as Malware Tech Blog. His real name is Marcus Hutchins. Marcus Hutchins lives, I suppose, I didn't find out for certain, but he lives
Across the pond.
across the pond. He's in Europe somewhere. And of course, he's being in Europe, can't be picked up by the U.S. authorities. Well, Marcus decided to visit DEF CON, as many hackers will, and was picked up by the FBI, right? The FBI? Yeah. As he was trying to board his plane. So, I mean, at least he got to enjoy the conference first.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they this whole situation is a little weird.
It is.
A lot of weird things happened sort of at the same time. So they arrested him at the same time the WannaCry wallets were drained.
really, really coincidental. And I
Um,
hope that's just a coincidence.
Yeah. The other piece of this is that the indictment, the grand jury indictment, my understanding of it, and I don't see it in the I don't see it in the article exactly when, but my understanding was that indictment was handed down like weeks before.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that they probably got intel that said, "Yep, he's going to be in the country. Let's get all our ducks in a row."
Yeah, it turns out DEF CON is more than like one day. So he was apparently in the US for like a week.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't explain that obviously, but
Right.
I could make some various conjectures as to it's a lot easier to find him when he's at the airport than cruising around Vegas.
Yeah, agreed. But given that he had been like spending tons of money and driving fancy cars and shooting all sorts of guns at ranges and staying at a massive villa, obviously he's guilty.
Yeah, I mean, he took all that money from WannaCry, right?
I guess. Yeah, so there's a bunch of people that, well, there's a bunch of speculation that he was spending big in Vegas, and that's obviously a red flag, and that he's guilty because he has money, which is interesting because that doesn't mean anything. If anybody, if you're in the security industry at all, some of these guys make a serious amount of money. Um, and by all accounts, he's single,
Yeah,
living in the UK somewhere.
and he stopped
Um,
WannaCry, man.
yeah, well, so there's a couple of right. So he's single. He's making, according to the one article, one of the posts said he brings home a six-figure salary,
Yeah,
which could be a small six-figure salary or a substantial six-figure salary. Doesn't matter. If you're single and you're making a six-figure salary, in most locations,
unless you've made really, really poor financial decisions in your
right,
life.
in most locations that you've got some expendable cash.
Yeah,
um DEF CON is a massive con. Like it's one of the biggest security cons you can go to. And let's see, would it surprise anyone if you were to save your money so that you can come to
yeah,
Vegas, which
right.
is a very flashy place, and throw a lot of money around and be all sorts of flashy and everything else? No, no, it really wouldn't. Um, Additionally, a bunch of other information came out, that he wasn't necessarily paying for all this stuff either. As the hero of the internet, um, a lot of stuff had been kind of given to him. So
Yeah,
it sounded like he was staying at a villa because, and he wasn't the only one there, but because
yeah. There
somebody
were like
else.
6 people, according to what I read.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, the article that Jason's referring to is from the online or the outline. Sorry,
Okay.
and it basically implies guilt as related to Marcus's detention, simply because he was spending a bunch of money in Vegas around DEF CON. I mean,
Right.
imagine that. You went to Vegas and you spent a bunch of money. I mean, you could say that for anyone who goes to Vegas, couldn't you? Right? So,
Right.
oh, he stayed in a villa with the largest pool in the area. A big freaking
Right.
deal. He wanted to live at large while he was in Vegas, right? So what I'm trying to say is a lot of people have completely thrown out this article because they feel like it's complete conjecture. I mean, yeah, it's fact. He spent a bunch of money. Big deal. He was having a good time in Vegas, right? I mean, he wasn't exactly secretive about that. It's all over Twitter. It's all over, various social outlets, whatever. There's a huge trail here that says, yes, he spent a bunch of money.
Right.
But as Jason said, he makes a lot of money.
Well, and the criminal mastermind here was sending out tweets like, "Hey, are there any tracks or anything in Vegas where we can drive these cars properly without being arrested?" Because
Yeah,
the first thing
right.
that criminal masterminds think about is, "Boy, I hope I don't get arrested."
So what I'm trying to be careful of here is that we don't want to paint him as either innocent or guilty,
Right.
right? Because um, what he's been accused of is writing a completely separate malware from WannaCry called Kronos,
Yep.
which I'm pretty sure is the Klingon homeworld.
It has something to do with time, doesn't it?
And it also has something to do with time. So anyway, this is apparently a banking malware. I don't know what it does. I don't know if it was even a big deal. I don't remember. Um, I don't remember hearing about an outbreak of Kronos. I mean, do you? I probably should have read about this before we started to record tonight, but um,
So Kronos goes back a while. It's banking malware. Yes, I had heard about it. Outbreaks recently? No. I think it's pretty
Well,
much
they're saying
dead
like
at this point. But
2014, I think.
yeah, yeah, it's a couple of years ago.
So anyway, he supposedly had either a hand in writing it or selling it. I can't quite get the story out. I've heard both, that he was an author, or that there was evidence that he was trying to sell Kronos.
Right.
Right now, the thing here is, he is a malware researcher, right? So, malware researchers do things like write code that may be malware to learn about it, right? Or to troubleshoot, or to whatever, right?
Right.
So, this is obviously, like, if some of that code ended up in the Kronos malware, is it because he intended it to be there, or is it because someone picked it up, or is it because he actually was trying to write malware? Like, we don't know this. We don't know the answers. We'd all like to say, this is Kevin Mitnick all over again. Someone being wrongfully detained over some, BS laws that need to be rewritten. But for all we know, he actually did write this malware, and he's living large because of it, right? We don't know. Not yet.
Yeah. Well, so I mean,
I don't want
there's
to
other
believe that,
things.
but I want
Right.
to believe this guy's one of the good guys. But
There's
um,
there's other bits out there. Like he was actually asking for a copy of the Kronos malware like
yeah,
years
that's
ago.
weird. Like, if he's an author, if he wrote the damn thing, then why is he asking for it? Right?
Well, the one comment I saw was something along the lines of, um, either either this is the dumbest criminal in the world, or this is the best long game I've ever seen.
Yeah,
Like,
right. I established
um,
myself as a complete moron.
as malware researchers, quite a lot of them spend a lot of time on IRC and forums and trolling
Yeah.
around on sites that sell malware, trying to make contacts, understand what's out there, understand how it works. That's kind of their job. Um,
Yeah, right. I mean, there's supposedly IRC logs of him talking about creating some new malware, and it's like, is it for real? Was he there for research purposes? Like, how do you know?
so I read those IRC logs. I mean, some of them are a little bit boring, so I at least skimmed through the
Yeah, I
logs
did
that I
sort of skim through
found.
them myself. They didn't seem like they involved him a whole lot.
No, they didn't involve
He
him a
was
whole lot.
present and
Well,
involved in the conversation, but he
they
wasn't like, "Oh yeah, we
ha-
should totally kill the man."
yep. Hang on, one step back. They didn't involve the handle that was allegedly him was
Oh,
not
right,
involved very much at all.
right.
And
Because
and wasn't.
it wasn't malware tech. It wasn't malware tech blog. It
Yeah,
was
I've
Touch
heard.
Me or something was the name of the.
Oh yeah, touch me, right?
Someone supposedly linked that handle to him.
Somehow, but the logs
I
are
don't know how. Yeah.
completely. They're like him making comments on stupid things that were going on and about, like, there's nothing in there that I've been able to see, unless I'm looking at the wrong logs, that are like, hey, I built this thing, or hey, I'm trying to figure out how to crack this particular system and I need help. Can hey, does this code look right? Like, when I think of, this is proof of somebody having written something or trying to sell it, then I expect to either see them talking about the code, looking for information on how to, helping them fix write the code, or maybe like, hey, I wrote this thing. You want to buy it? It's X amount of money and it does this. Like, and I don't see any of that anywhere. Again,
Yeah.
this is
Right.
allegedly on all sides of this thing, but um, so yeah, there's a lot of people that I have that I am at least acquaintances of that are pretty broken up about this,
Yeah.
very
So I mean,
confused and trying to figure out what's going on.
there are a number of people in the infosec industry that I very much respect, that very firmly believe he is innocent,
Right.
or at least that he's being detained unlawfully, or maybe not unlawfully, but I don't know what the right word is, but that it's being handled poorly, and that
Yes.
he couldn't possibly do this.
Right.
I know this guy. He couldn't do this. He's one of the good guys, you know, that sort of
Yep.
thing. Now, I mean, does that mean he's innocent? Who knows? You know, I mean, I like I said, I would love to believe that he is.
Right.
I'm the sort of guy who's sort of an optimist. When I see a guy who looks like he's trying to work for the better of mankind, I like to believe that that is. What
Sorry.
the heck are you doing?
Trying to open something.
Bang!
Turns out mute is the wrong button here. I gotta actually hit
Yeah.
the mute button.
So anyway, I like to believe that that is sincere, and that it's not a cover for something, and that it's not just him trying to make himself look better or whatever. So I hope that's not the case. I hope that this will all blow over, and we'll find out that he is on the up and up. But we just don't know right now.
Perfectly innocent guy.
Perfectly innocent guy. And I mean, look at the picture of this guy. He looks like such a nice guy. Look at that hair. So anyway, we've included a number of articles in the show notes. Feel free to read them and draw your own conclusions as to whether he's, you know, some big shot playboy that's spending a bunch of money in Vegas and obviously guilty, or that he's been wrongfully detained. You know, it's completely up to the reader at this point, because, you know, obviously we just don't know. Hopefully this goes to a fair trial and the truth is found. Not that we have now, you know, imprisoned another kid who was just trying to make the world a better place.
Right. Exactly.
Have you opened your new beer? Your other beer?
Yep. I have.
I have poured my not quite second mug. Apparently a bomber is not quite two of these pewter mugs.
I think this may be one of the beers that was around for a while.
Yeah, that
which is sad because I wanted to drink it, but it does not. The scent of this particular beer is not filling me with positive vibes, as it were.
Well, I'm gonna play the transition music here, and then you get to try some of that beer, and we're gonna get it live on YouTube.
Hey, yeah.
All right, that's it for the news. We've had enough politics and whatnot to fill an evening. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely enough.
So is that beer so foul you're not even going to try it?
Oh, I'm terrified now. Wow. I mean, I'll give it a shot, but
does it smell bad? I mean, obviously from the way your face looked.
Oh, that's foul. Yeah, that beer's no good. Oh.
You want to go get yourself another beer?
Wow. Oh. Yeah, we're going to have to.
See that? I totally forced you into that. You've been coerced.
Cool. So you've got the helm. Talk about your S3 stat thing.
I will do that.
I'll be right back.
You go get yourself a better beer. All right, folks. So as I mentioned in our last episode, I've started hosting the podcast episodes on S3 because my little server was getting very inundated with download requests whenever I released a new episode. And I had a couple of comments to the effect of, your server appears to be crying. And so anyway, I figured S3, it's cheap enough. Why not give it a shot? The problem with S3 that I found was that it's not easy to get download statistics out of S3. You can turn on logging, but it's like any log you'd expect. There's a bunch of very tiny files that get thrown into your S3 bucket, which just contain things like file accesses and hits and whatnot. Parsing all that data, I'd either have to write some code to do it myself, or like I ended up doing, look for a service to do it for me. I came across a company called S3 Stat, and The only reason I'm bringing them up on the show, it's not like there's some kind of a sponsor or something. They had a free trial, which I tried out for a month, and it seemed to work pretty well. And while I was looking through their pricing, I found that they have what they're referring to as a cheap bastard plan. So I can be a cheap bastard sometimes. And that's exactly what I figured was right for the podcast, because the podcast doesn't really make a ton of money. I mean, you Patreon donors are awesome, and you're giving us enough money to cover the S3 expenses, and I believe we're going to be able to move the Iron Sysadmin podcast on the whole onto EC2 or some other host, so that it's out of my basement and onto a professional class system. Not that the system's my basement on professional class. I am a sysadmin after all. But anyway, S3 Stat was kind enough to grant us their cheap bastard plan, which is essentially we get to use S3 Stat for free. So if you run a site, or if you run anything that uses an S3 bucket and you want to be able to get good statistics out of it, check out. I wrote a little blog entry on it, which was part of the cheap bastard plan. You have to write a blog or something, sort of saying your usage and whatnot, and make it public. And then S3 Stat will review it and then grant you your free status. Anyway, I've done so. If you go to, I should have looked this up before the show. Hang on. Go to my website, which is underground.org. And it's a Drupal site. So /node/190 gives you an article about the S3 usage statistics. Then I pretty much go on a little bit about S3 Stat. I give you some examples of what the dashboard looks like and whatnot. Like I said, they are not a sponsor, so you're not going to hear me talking about them every show, but I did want to give them a thumbs up. I do like the fact that the service works well. I do like that they are giving this away for free if you are willing to go through the hoops that they've asked for. And I figured giving them a little bit of love on the podcast was good enough for me. So there you have it, S3 Stat. Check it out if you've got S3 buckets that you need statistics on. So, Jason, have you returned from retrieving beer? You look like you have.
Have a new beer.
You have a new beer. Guinness.
Foreign Extra.
You cannot go wrong with Guinness. I don't believe I've ever had Foreign Extra, though.
Yeah, it's very good. So, hey, in addition to your S3 thing, and speaking of moving the website, static websites you can actually serve directly out of S3.
Really?
Yes.
It's a shame I don't have any static websites.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's that. But yeah. So
who has a static website anymore?
Lots of people actually. We're just weird.
Actually, that is that could be useful.
Yeah. So I don't remember how to do it off the top of my head, but I can get you instructions on how to do it.
You have to look into that.
Yeah. So pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, I do have a use for. Yeah. Yeah, I could that could actually be useful. I'll have to look into that. That's pretty cool. Sounds like a pretty cheap way to host a static website. Because S3, I've heard some people say that S3 is more expensive than you'd expect it to be. And I haven't really had that. Haven't really found that to be the case. Over the course of last month. Hang on, let me pull up my S3 statistics.
Yeah, no, I found S3 to be pretty cheap, and you can do some crazy stuff if you hook up lambdas. I don't know if you've encountered lambdas yet, but
We've talked about it a bit, but yeah.
If you hook up lambdas with S3 and some of their other services, you can do some pretty insane stuff.
So we've moved like 36 gig off of S3 just hosting the podcast. And the estimated cost, at least out of S3 Stat, which is one of the cool things, they'll give you cost estimates about your data transfers, is like $4, $3.37. So like under $3.50. I can tell you that my entire EC2 bill last month was a whopping like $8. So, that includes this and a couple other personal things. So the money we're getting out of Patreon covers this. and then some. So the and then some, I think, is going to become, I'm going to make ironsysadmin.com its own site. And I'm going to host it on S3, or not S3, on EC2 in some manner. I haven't figured out what the best way to do that is, the most cost-effective way. But once I figure that out, that's where it's going to end up, I think. So anyway, that's about it for our announcements. I did want to mention, do you listen to the Reply All podcast yet? I mentioned it to you a little while ago.
No. I've got, where's my phone? Oh good, my podcast's updated. I now have,
You have too many podcasts to listen to. I know. This is always your problem.
I have 55 unread podcasts, or unread. 55 unlistened podcasts.
New. You could just call it new.
New works. I've got 55 new podcasts to the tune of 52 hours. So they're almost an hour a piece.
Wow.
I don't.
You should consider listening to your podcasts more often.
No, I do. I don't travel. I haven't been traveling as much lately as I was.
How many podcasts do you subscribe to?
Good question. Let's find out. Go Gadget podcasts. Does it tell me? 20 apparently, and of that, like 5 or 6 of them are no. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, five of them aren't really regular. They come out very, very rarely. And I have 2 podcasts that are they put too many episodes out.
I mean, I've got 18 subscriptions, and one of those is Paul's, which releases like a dozen freaking podcasts a week.
Okay, so you're talking podcasts. That's on my phone. I typically only listen to podcasts on my phone when I'm out doing something or driving.
Oh, you have a separate.
I also have a number of podcasts that are video based that I subscribe to on my computer, and I usually listen to those every day. And I'm also I'm not quite as far behind on those, but I listen to those as well.
You're a little bit insane on the media consumption.
Well, I've probably got about 60, almost 70 or 70 new episodes I have to go through. Part of this is like I said, I've been crazy busy lately.
You obviously need to either cull some podcasts or move to a planet that has longer days.
Have you seen the pinned tweet on my Twitter feed?
I have not.
You should go look at the pinned tweet on my Twitter feed.
Let's go find the pinned tweet on Jason's Twitter feed.
Right. See, that sort of explains it all. Yeah.
Apparently
so
I doesn't make this easy for me.
I do listen to. I listened to an episode of Admin.
Can someone please add a few hours to the day? There's not enough time to do all the.
You already blew it.
This
before.
is a family
You might as well read it.
Yeah. This is all the shit that he's done. Okay, so you do need to move to a planet with longer days.
Yes.
I mean, Mars is further from the sun. They should have longer days, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that how that works?
Yeah, but
so you could move to Mars. Though I don't know that the climate will support you just yet.
No, I will give Elon a call and.
But anyway, the reason that I brought up podcasts and asked you if you listen to Reply All is because the most recent episode, or at least I should say, now it's one episode previous to the most recent episode. It's called Long Distance, and I've actually heard 1 or 2 other podcasts already also call this out. So other people are finding this to be an interesting episode as well. So you've heard the old. I received a call from Microsoft tech support, and I played out the call by feeding the guy a line of BS, to play it out, and hilarity ensues. Correct?
Yes, may or may not have done that myself.
Yeah. So the folks at Gimlet, I forget how this started. He received a voicemail from one of these guys. So, I mean, the average person would have just ignored that, right? And maybe next time they called, they would have picked up and played it out. He actually called them back. And then after he called them back, he basically kept calling them to figure out what the heck they're doing. He found out what company they're with. Like, there's an actual valid, like, company in India that's doing this. Like,
Okay.
they're actually, so, I mean, I don't want to give away too much of the podcast. You should go listen to Reply All. The episode is called Long Distance, and there's a second part to the episode, which I haven't listened to yet. But basically, they're run by this company that was doing valid tech support. They were selling antivirus or something, right?
Right.
And they realized that they could sell more antivirus by calling people, cold calling people, and telling them, hey, you've got a virus on your computer. So they're actually selling legitimate antivirus, but they're doing it in such a way that it's
By
essentially
lying through their teeth.
They're lying through their teeth to sell it. But you should go listen to the episode. I mean,
It's now queued up. You've convinced me.
If my review of their what was the title of that other episode? Ship to Timbuktu. That was another good episode. That was the one I played for you about the Girl Scouts, or the European Girl Scouts, the Girl Guides.
Yes.
In an internment camp. Remember I played that one for you when we were going
to
the
headed
concert?
to the concert. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good episode too. And I gotta say, every single episode that I hear from them, it starts out like a little slow, and it's like, why am I listening to this? And then it picks up. The investigative journaling that these guys do is just, it's so interesting. There was an episode where some girl got scammed out of an Apple Watch through Craigslist or some other
right
online.
Yeah, you mentioned this.
Site. Yeah, and it shipped through this third-party company that ships to Russia, and like most people would be like, "Oh well, we found the shipping company. It seemed weird, but we looked at it and it looks legitimate." And oh well, you lost your Apple Watch. These guys went as far as to find the person that it shipped to, and contacted them, like called them on the freaking phone and talked to them. It's pretty crazy stuff. It's really cool.
If you want to listen to another one, since apparently you have all the time in the world and can listen to a ton of podcasts.
No, I'm only 10 podcasts in the whole, where you're 55.
Right. This one actually has an ending. It's only 8. Let's see, 5, 6, 7 episodes. It's called S-Town. It's actually really, really interesting.
S-Town.
Yeah, it's not a techie podcast or anything. It's just it was interesting. I listened to it. It's been out for a little while. I'm gonna have
to see if Beyond Pod knows about S-Town.
It should. It was pretty popular.
S-Town or just S-Town?
Yeah. Because, well, listen to the podcast. You'll understand.
S-Town. S-Town is a new podcast from Serial.
Right. Yeah, so it's investigative journalism. It's really interesting.
So do I have to go like download all the episodes of this? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, there's 7.
Pick up where it is.
Yeah, no, there's 7 of them, and that's it. And it's over and done with, unless they follow up with it later. But yeah,
interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Cool. So speaking of podcasts, I listened to an episode of the Admin podcast, specifically the one about subnetting.
Oh, good. And you heard our mention?
Yeah. So as a network engineer, guys, we should talk. Wasn't too bad. There were some things you got wrong. There were some things that you got wrong and then fixed later. And I can nitpick this stuff to death. But overall, not too bad. Not too bad.
There was a follow-up episode where they got a couple corrections emailed to them and they had corrected themselves. So maybe you'll catch that later.
Hang on. Let's see. How many podcasts am I away from that one?
That's like 30 podcasts away from where you are.
No, not quite that much. Let's see. Like 15? Yeah, about 15.
So listen to that episode before you start critiquing them, because they did make some corrections.
Yeah.
I don't know which one you're referring to, but they did
No,
make
no.
some
So
corrections.
look, the big one that I will complain about only because it was pointed out to me is that a/24 is not a class C.
Yeah, that was the correction that they got.
Is it one they got? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because, well, so I think the feedback they got was that the whole concept of classes has been thrown away because of
Right.
supernetting and subnetting and
Yep.
NAT and whatever. It's just like an old school way of looking at, classes.
Right. Well, Class C's came out of a very specific range of IPs,
Yeah,
as did
yeah,
Class A's, B's, and so.
right, right. So the concept of a Class C, while to folks like you and I that have been in this for a while, still has sort of meaning. It's not valid anymore because it's changed.
Look, on my CCNA test, you had to know the classes and you had to know subnets. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Classes
I had to learn.
and CIDR notation are different.
I had to learn the classes when I was in business school as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm not saying that I did well on that particular course. In fact, it was a course on TCP/IP, which was all about subnetting. Subnetting is such a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's useful.
It is absolutely useful. The math behind it is such a pain in the ass.
Yeah,
like if you're not just memorizing tables of how many bits go to what masks, if you're actually learning the math behind subnetting, oh my god, it is horrible.
But after you do it for a while, it just happens. You just
yeah. I mean, after I got out of college and I got into the real world, I sort of learned what different subnet masks looked like and how many bits were in different masks, and that's all I've needed ever since.
Right.
I'm also not a network engineer.
True. Of course, I can turn around and say I'm not a sysadmin. Although, actually, I am a sysadmin now.
You are a sysadmin. You're not a network engineer anymore.
Yeah, well, look, once a network engineer, always a network engineer.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's a Marine who's no longer active duty, and every time I tell him he's retired, he looks at me like he's going to kill me in my sleep. Apparently, you never retire as a Marine.
No,
you're always a Marine. Anyway,
as somebody I talk to on a regular basis and admire greatly, it's all about the scar tissue.
Yeah. So, don't tell a Marine he's retired or that he's an ex-Marine, because you're never an ex-Marine either. I guess these are the things that I don't get. I could talk to him about subnet masks and he wouldn't be
right.
He wouldn't get it either. He also wouldn't care. Anyway, you got anything else cool going on? I've been working with free IPA. How about you?
I'm about to be working with free IPA.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I started tinkering with it for authentication for all the hundreds of servers we have to deal with at work, and I ended up deploying it at home for like the half dozen servers that I manage at home, because even at that scale, it's useful enough. So I finally have free IPA deployed for my home machines, and I have Catello configured that it'll join the free IPA domain as I kick out new machines, so they get all their authentication from the moment they are created from free IPA, nice. Which is pretty cool.
Very nice.
Pretty cool. I had to hard code a password to do it, and I really didn't like that. I got to find a better way.
Yeah, I'm still working my way around that sort of stuff too. HashiCorp's Vault seems like it might be a good solution for that sort of stuff.
What, HashiCorp? Is that what you said? Corpse?
HashiCorp. I will send you a link. HashiCorp.
No, so Catello, which I know you're familiar with, will allow you to define realms as part of your foreman proxy, which then makes some sort of a key tab that will allow you to add and remove machines from the domain. But it just won't work, and I don't know why. It just doesn't. It keeps giving me weird errors related to Kerberos, and I don't know. I just haven't figured it out yet.
because Kerberos was designed to make everybody cry.
That could be true. That could be true. I mean, it could be just that, SE Linux is getting in my way. That's what usually happens.
That's possible. Kerberos is notoriously difficult. So,
yeah.
I mean, I've set it up, but I'm not sure that I understood exactly what I was doing when I set it up.
Yeah. So, I mean, FreeIPA uses Kerberos as part of its authentication mechanisms, but
Right.
you don't have to touch it. That's the nice thing about IPA.
Right. So, yeah, I'm going to be using it for user authentication, that sort of stuff. Well, let's see. What else have I been doing? Docker. And then when I'm done with that, I do some Docker. So I've been playing with Atomic Linux because that's neat
all
and
over the
fun.
place.
I got to write some socket code this weekend. That was fun.
Oh, you're tinkering with Atomic? That's nice.
Yeah, Atomic's neat. So I wrote some socket code in Python that does crazy things because I was bored. And just losing my mind. I spend disturbing amounts of time in meetings these days, and I'm not sure. Apparently, that's part of growing up. Kind of sucks. I go through my schedule every week, and I go, "Oh, cool! I've got an hour to do something productive," and the rest of my week is meetings.
Meetings. It's the way it goes. The further up the chain you get, the more meetings you have to go to.
Yeah, I didn't go up the chain any. I just started getting meetings.
Well, that's because you're at a startup where there's like 10 employees. The chain's not very long.
Yeah, all right, fine. So yeah, got to blow off some steam at a barbecue this weekend, but other than that, I'm just kind of
the barbecue that you were at instead of working on the Derby.
Barbecues are important. I don't want to hear it.
So are derbies. We could have had a barbecue while working on the derbies.
We could have, but you weren't available either, so I don't want to hear it.
I was, but then you weren't.
No, something about it's my daughter's birthday.
No, that's next weekend.
Right, that's next weekend. You're not available when I am.
Yeah, next weekend I'll have a 7-year-old going on 17. God. Daughters are a blessing. That's the best. That's as much as I'm going to say on the podcast.
I have 3 boys. They occasionally break themselves, but that's all I really have to worry about.
Yeah, right. Be happy you didn't have girls. All right. So should we move on to our main topic, or should we keep rambling on about life in general, which is pretty much where we've gone?
Okay.
Or you got anything else cool to talk about that you've been working on?
I don't do anything cool at all. Just meetings.
Oh, I finally started building my RHEL 7 web server. Or CentOS 7 anyway. Which I talked about months ago that I didn't have time to build.
Wow, that new RHEL 7 operating system that came out?
Yeah, brand new, like 2 years ago, brand new, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so on to Docker. But first,
all right, Maestro, let's talk about an orchestra.
Let's talk about orchestra. Hold on. Do I have one of those funny sticks that the orchestra people use? I don't have anything that's even stick-like around. I have a bottle. Okay, so we've been talking about Docker the past several episodes at this point, and also we've covered what the heck containers are and why you'd use them. We've covered some of the finer aspects of Docker and networking and storage and all the various pieces that let you run services in Docker. The thing that would be next would be orchestration of Docker, right? So I think first we should cover why this is important. So Just like in the early days of virtualization, you had VMs that could have been a very manual process, right? So you'd start up a VM, you'd tell it where its disk was and what its CPU and memory were, and you could run the thing, and it would start up, and you'd have a server, right? And that was fine because obviously your hypervisor is never going to crash, right? Until it does. And then when it does, you need something that's going to either start things back up automatically or perhaps migrate those workloads onto other nodes. And that's pretty much exactly the problem that Docker orchestration from various different projects is meant to solve. So just like with virtualization, you have many different platforms. You've got VMware, you've got KVM and libvirt, you've got Zen, you've got Hyper-V, probably countless others, but those are the big ones. And there's all there's frameworks or not frameworks, but there's applications around all of them that will allow you to sort of automate virtualization. There's similar things around container or containers, and the generalized term for this, at least that I've always heard, is Docker orchestration. So you've got several different projects that handle these things. So I guess the best thing to answer is why you want to orchestrate your containers. Basically, you've got all these pieces: networking, storage, and then of course you've got hosts that you run all these things on top of. If you want high availability, you need to be able to have a system that will run your containers on whatever host is available at the moment and attach all the networking and storage to the containers as needed, right? So, Jason, you're being very quiet here. I know I'm on a roll here, but
I'm letting you
can
go.
chime in any moment here.
No, you're doing well.
Doing well, good. So basically, there are several projects that will allow you to orchestrate Docker. So, Jason, did you have any more information to fill in on the general concepts of orchestration before we get into any of the various platforms?
Right. So I just put a link in the notes. There's a big difference, although it doesn't sound like there is, but there's a big difference between automation and orchestration. Um, Orchestration takes into account the actual scheduling of things and making sure that you're optimizing things and doing things in the correct order to make sure that everything works right. Whereas automation is generally like keep doing this one thing over and over and over again, and it doesn't really take into account everything else that's going on. So there's a good chunk of scheduling involved in orchestration as well. But yeah, so straight vanilla Docker sort of has orchestration in it, kind of, but I mean it's very manual. I mean you sort of run things and you give it all of the information and tell it where everything is running, and it's very hands-on. Whereas when you move into some of the platforms that are designed for orchestration, you give it its initial instructions, or in some cases you give it a description of what you want running. For instance, I need these 3 containers running. They need to connect to each other, and I want to expose ports on this guy to the outside world. Go, and it does it for you. As opposed to saying, well, I need to connect this container to this container using this port, and it needs to, and having every single thing identified.
So the cool thing about Docker, and I guess this could be applied to virtualization as well, but in the same way that you could run several web servers to serve the same application in a highly available mode, you can run several Docker containers to do the same thing, right? So your web application is now inside of a container, and maybe you've got 3 containers running that application, and maybe 3, say, backend systems, backend containers doing the same thing. Orchestration and automation will help you make sure that state is maintained. You're supposed to say yes.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I'm trying to think of one of the things that you strive for is to reduce the amount of microservices that you build that have state, meaning that any microservice that doesn't actually maintain state inside of that container can be horizontally scaled almost infinitely.
Right.
There's always limits. I understand that, but you can scale it horizontally because there's no state. So it doesn't matter which one of those containers gets the request. They can all equally process that request. So, the holy grail, if you will, is to make sure that all of your containers are stateless. Now, in practical terms, that's almost impossible because somewhere data has to be stored, depending on what
Right.
you're doing.
And there are ways to share state,
Yep.
through things like
Right.
memcache or something like that.
Right. But the larger deployment that you have that shares state, there's a limitation that you're actually going to start slowing things down by adding more, by scaling horizontally. So,
Sure.
right. But that whole bit about throwing all of those containers out there and just letting them go, is the orchestration bit, because you're not necessarily going to know, and you can control all of this. You're going to go insane, but you could control all of this by yourself. You're not going to know necessarily what ports are exposed. You're not going to know what the IP address is on them. You're not going to know which server they're running on. And that's all information that the orchestration platform handles for you, while making sure that all of the communication that's supposed to be happening happens, and that that provided that you haven't um, specified anything to prevent it from doing so, it will balance all the containers across all of the nodes, and basically make it as efficient as possible, given the constraints that you put on the system. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background that you just don't have to worry about. Well, until it
So
breaks, but
to step back for just a moment, up until this point, we've been talking mainly about Docker on a single host, right? So whether that's an atomic host or just a Linux box or whatever, you sit down, you run a Docker run command, and you've got a Docker container up and running.
right,
When you scale that out to more than one host, you need a way to manage what containers are running where, and that's sort of what we've been alluding to for the past couple minutes when you're talking about scaling across nodes and whatnot.
right. So take virtualization, because you sort of run into this problem with virtualization as well.
Yeah.
So if you have let's go the Linux route. If you have a KVM box, um, a single box isn't that bad. You can manage that box. You can throw some VMs on it. Everything's good to go. All right. If you have two KVM boxes, now you can run them both individually, and you can sort of maybe by hand migrate things back and forth, but it becomes a little bit more difficult.
I've done this, by the way,
Yep.
manually. It's a pain in the
Yep.
butt.
Yes. So, but expand that to where you have, a dozen KVM boxes or 100 KVM boxes. There's a point at which, like, you could theoretically manage it all by hand,
Yeah.
but you're gonna be
You and a
really, really
team of a
tired,
dozen
and
other,
you're gonna go crazy.
you and a team of a dozen other sysadmins.
So Red Hat has a product called Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, that
Yeah,
handles all of that for you, being able
or
to.
Overt if you're looking for the upstream name that you don't
Right.
have to pay Red Hat for.
Yep. So that is similar to an orchestration platform. It allows you to distribute the load across multiple servers. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But in the virtualization world, generally, the IPs are still going to be mostly static. You're going to
Mhm.
have to know all of that information. You can't just refer to something by name and have it connect to another VM. It doesn't. Maybe there's a platform out there that does it, but generally it doesn't work. In the Docker world, they took it a step further and tried to kind of abstract away things like networking, and basically allowed you can still separate things onto separate networks, but you don't need to know what the IPs are on those networks. As long as what's running inside the container doesn't care what its IP is, and as long as it can get to everything else by a name instead of directly by an IP, you don't need to know any of that information. And the orchestration platform takes care of all of that for you. So it's like it's almost like a more advanced, a slightly more advanced or more complicated VM type system.
Yeah, I
So
mean, really, it's the same type of technology except for a different platform. That's what it comes down to.
right,
So it may or may not be more advanced. It's more or less it's the tool that fits the job.
right, and then the next step beyond that is to go what they call serverless, which is sort of weird, but that's Lambdas, where
Which is
it's
not actually serverless. There is a
yeah,
server
well,
involved.
it's serverless like wireless is wireless.
You just don't have to think about the server.
Yes, yeah,
Just
somebody
like
else
in
manages it
wireless, you
for
don't
you.
have to think about the wire.
Yeah, Lambdas is you literally write a piece of code and you paste the code into a web page somewhere and it runs that code when you need it to. Turns out Lambdas on most providers run inside of Docker containers. They're just
Imagine
very
that.
very specific Docker containers for that. So AWS for their Lambda system, they'll actually provide you with a Docker container that has all of that already built in it so that you can run it locally to do your testing and everything. But Lambdas is a whole different story.
Right.
So orchestration. So there's a bunch of different orchestrators out there. We're going to talk about three of them. Docker, the original Docker company or whatever the history is there. Docker has one.
Big D Docker for those of you
Yes,
following along at home.
big D Docker. Their system is called Swarm. And of the three that we're going to talk about, it is by far the simplest system.
It's
It
also,
is,
from what I'm reading, built into Docker. There's no extra
yeah,
packages to install. It's just like if you've
right,
got Docker, you could use Swarm.
right. So Docker Swarm is pretty simple. I think it's one command to join a swarm.
Yeah, there's
Something like that.
I put a link in the notes. Basically, Docker's documentation on how to run Docker Swarm. It looked pretty straightforward.
Yep. So you did a little bit of research on this. You want to talk about it?
Well, I mean, in research, I basically Googled it and got the elevator pitch, which is that Docker Swarm is built into Docker and it's pretty easy to, excuse me, pretty easy to configure. And it'll do some of the orchestration that you might want. There does not appear to be any sort of a nice self-service UI or anything. It's all command line based. It'll manage pretty much anything Docker can see, so networks and storage and whatnot. I didn't really dig that extensively into it. I don't have any Docker orchestration deployed myself at the moment because we don't do a whole lot of Docker yet. That day will come, but unfortunately for the podcast, we haven't been there yet.
Right. So so Swarm is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's a couple things that I really like about it. One of them is like I said, it's crazy easy to add a node to a swarm. Basically, you install your OS, you apt-get or yum install a whatever the Docker version is that you're using,
Right.
and then you run the command to join the swarm. Swarm gives you all of the basic orchestration tools. It'll do scaling, so you can tell it, I want to run 3 instances of this container or 10 instances of this container, and it will load balance them automatically based on whatever the algorithm is that you choose to use. You can put constraints and all sorts of other stuff on it. It'll do the networking automatically spans across all of the swarm hosts and uses mutual TLS, authentication and encryption, for all connections.
Mutual TLS.
Yeah, so it's basically host to host TLS with client and server certificates. But the gist of it is that every single connection over the network from container to container is encrypted.
Handy.
Which can make life much easier when you're trying to deal with certain things.
Amanda Rudd might have something to say about that.
Yeah, well, your apps don't necessarily need to have encryption built into them anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Whatever. Miss Rudd, the politician.
It does it does load balancing, and it does so it does service discovery, what they call service discovery, which is basically Um, the name of my container is the DNS name that you can use inside of other containers to get to it, which is useful. And you can update individual nodes at a time, and it'll. So if a node a node goes down, whatever happens to be running on that will fire up onto other machines. So it's pretty slick. You get a lot for very small, quick um, setup. It's pretty neat.
Right.
Um, Swarm uses something called stacks. And this seems to be a recurring theme across the orchestrators. A stack is, so if you've used when you're using a single instance of Docker, there's this system called Docker Compose. Basically, you create a YAML file that says, I want these containers set up. I want them to link in this way, and here's all the properties of all of it. And that's a compose file is usually an instance of a single service that you're trying to deploy. So if you have say you're trying to deploy a Drupal system, you may have the Drupal container in there, the MariaDB or MySQL container in there for your database, and then say an Nginx container in there as your front end. And you put all those in the compose file together and you deploy it. That way, you don't have to run all three containers individually. You just run it with a single compose statement and up it goes. Swarm has something similar called stacks. It's basically the Docker Compose way, at least so far. I've played with it a little bit. It appears to be basically Docker Compose for Swarm. So it does kind of the same thing, but it treats them as a stack across the cluster so that you can bring that entire stack up and down without having to figure out where things are and oh wait, I need to jump to this server to turn things up, down, etc. So and it'll deploy them and balance them and everything, and then you can scale it different ways. So it's pretty slick. So Swarm is a lot of fun. It's really easy to get set up. You can test it really easily. You can test it with 2 VMs. It's that simple.
Yeah, so a lot of folks that start out with orchestration on Docker seem to start with Swarm just because it's readily available and it's relatively easy to set up, and it's right there in the Docker documentation. So, right. Yeah, it's sort of right there. So there are, I don't know if I want to say more advanced, but there are other options if you're looking to orchestrate Docker. Some of which are simply just a little bit higher up on the totem pole, some of which go as far as to give you self-service portals and an actual platform as a service. So I guess moving beyond Docker Swarm, we've got Kubernetes, which is actually based out of a Google project. Yes. Kubernetes is the word, I forget, was it like Norse? No, it's not Norse. The word, it basically refers to a ship's captain. And that's why Kubernetes, it's, the helm of the ship, right? So that's how it got its name. But it came out of Google. I don't know if it's actually part of their container platform, because I've heard them refer to a project called Borg, which is their internal container orchestration platform, which is not, as far as I know, not something that's available to the public. But Kubernetes did come out of Google, and Kubernetes is the base for several other orchestration, or I should say platform as a service offerings, which we'll probably cover in a future episode. So right.
Kubernetes is Greek for helmsman.
Greek. There we go. Sorry, not Norse. I don't know if they're related at all.
Norse would have been better because Vikings.
Norse would have been awesome, right? Because there's Vikings and mead and blood.
Mead.
And mead. Right. So Kubernetes, I don't know. I haven't found a direct comparison between the various orchestration platforms like Swarm and Kubernetes. I just know that Kubernetes is another way of doing the same thing. And they've got lots of other terms that cover, the same sort of things we just covered with Swarm. So I don't know if we've got direct translations from Swarm to Kubernetes.
I would say that Kubernetes and many and well, maybe not many, but the two additional orchestration frameworks or orchestration, I guess, frameworks that we're going to talk about, Kubernetes and Mesosphere, um, basically build on what Docker already has. Um, so Docker, and Docker Swarm, I believe, did not. No, Kubernetes and Mesosphere were out before Docker Swarm was, but um, the basic pieces of Docker Swarm and what they do all exist in pretty much all the frameworks. But there's more features. And that's sort of the thing is like the orchestration platforms. It's all about features. You get the basics, and then it's what other features are there, and how easy it is to use, and what can I do with it that's different, and etc. So with Kubernetes, yes, it's a Google project, or was a Google project. It may actually still be a Google project. I'm not entirely certain. Um, Kubernetes is sort of built to scale, like huge. Um, I believe in the more recent versions of Kubernetes, you could actually run it in a manner where it would um, run across multiple cloud providers. So they do federations now. So you could actually set up a Kubernetes federation that had clusters on AWS and Azure and Google Cloud Compute all together, all working together over the internet. Um,
Hmm.
if that's your thing.
If that's your thing.
Yeah, it gets crazy big.
Well, I mean, after
Being
that DNS failure, we can't trust a single provider, right?
right. Being crazy big, it also gets a little bit more complicated. Um, so Kubernetes has master nodes, and unfortunately, they changed the name, and they're now, I believe, just called nodes. They used to be called minions, which made it really cool.
Minions. That's awesome.
Yes,
I think they
yes.
changed that because of the negative connotation of the word minions.
Yeah,
Or maybe
yeah,
it was
yeah.
trademark issues with
That's why they didn't use master and slave anymore either, because negative connotations. But
because
look,
when
there's
referring
a
to
movie.
computers, you can't dare call them slaves.
Well,
Even
have you
though
seen the
every computer you've ever interacted with is a slave to its master.
have you not seen the Minions movie? I mean, come on. How
Have
can you
indeed.
not use Minions and have it like that's not negative at all. That's
Bananas.
cute and cuddly. Yes, bananas. Anyway, you got masters, you got minion or nodes rather. And it just sort of scales from there.
So, fun fact when it comes to Kubernetes and naming, you may see Kubernetes shorthand as K8S. And I learned a little while ago while researching Kubernetes why that is. It's because there are 8 letters between the K and the S in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So some people will call it K8S or Kates.
Yeah. So I've seen other projects do that. So
Yeah,
Serendipity.
I just thought it was funny. My project name is so long that I can't bear to type it again, so I type it as Kates.
So the blog software I use is called Serendipity, and they lower it to S9Y for whatever reason. So it's
I do remember that.
yeah.
I never knew why they called it that. Now I know. It makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. Kubernetes is not original in this.
Right. Well, Kubernetes is slightly different. So
older.
it's K 8 letters S, whereas
Yeah.
Serendipity is S. There's 9 letters total Y. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
a little bit different, but whatever.
But S7Y would be too much of a bear to pronounce.
Yeah, I guess. So yeah, so Kubernetes a little bit more complicated. It has like this built-in web interface that you can get to see like all the stuff that's running.
Oh, there is a web UI for Kubernetes.
Yeah,
I wasn't aware of that.
It's a I would say it's not very advanced. Let's put it that way. It's got some neat stuff in it, but it's not,
More or less informative. Is that what you're getting at?
yeah, it's more informative than it is like, you can control everything. Um, it's relatively easy to join new Kubernetes nodes to a cluster, at least in my experience thus far. Which now we're starting to get to the point where I'm a little limited on what I've done. But I have set up a very simple Kubernetes cluster. It's pretty simple to get it up and running.
Right.
All of or most of the Kubernetes stuff runs. Maybe not most. I'm trying to think if there's pretty much all of it runs in Docker containers itself.
Yeah, I've noticed that, which blew my mind.
Yeah, so it's like these Docker containers that
The thing
run
orchestrating Docker is running in Docker. What?
It's
What?
pretty cool. It has a bunch of different, there's a bunch of storage backends that you can plug into it. The one thing that's nice about Kubernetes that I've noticed, and this is starting to sort of roll across a lot of the frameworks now is so for networking, there's a lot of different networking providers that you can use. There's Weave, there's Calico. We've talked about some of this. Well, with Kubernetes, they came up with what they call CNI, which is the container networking interface. So there's a standard interface for plugging these in now. And from my understanding is that came from, or it was built into Kubernetes first, or came from conversations between the developers or the community at large.
Right.
And that, that's likely going to roll in elsewhere. I don't believe it exists in Docker yet, native Docker yet. It might exist in Mesosphere. I don't know. It's been a little while since I played with that. But at any rate, Kubernetes is probably the bigger orchestration framework out there. It seems to be, I don't know, the one vendor that we talked to, actually multiple vendors that I've talked to now, have basically stated that, look, Kubernetes won the war. So
yeah,
that's pretty much who you should be using.
Yeah, so every person I've talked to that is doing this is doing Docker at scale, is either using Swarm or Kubernetes.
Right. So when I was looking at OpenShift, Red Hat's explanation of their version 3. So short history, OpenShift used to be something slightly different. It wasn't Docker. It was something that was kind of like Docker, but not really. Yep. When they went to version 3, they kind of went out and, everybody was saying like, well, Docker. And they said, okay.
They sort of decided, why are we reinventing the wheel when Docker does everything we need?
Right. So, and then they went out and said, well, what's the best orchestration platform out there? We might as well use that.
Yep.
And they kind of looked at the landscape and they decided that Kubernetes is by far the leader, and that is where they decided to put themselves. So Red Hat uses Kubernetes. A bunch of other people that I've encountered use Kubernetes as well.
Yeah. So OpenShift is a platform as a service, which maybe we'll cover a little more in depth. The idea of platform as a service in another episode. But the bottom line is, it's a web UI, which behind it is Kubernetes and Docker.
Right. It's the thing that sits on top of the orchestrator that runs the container system.
Right. In a friendly way.
Look, this is where we get back to the Russian stacking dolls again. It's just, it's turtles all the way down.
Turtles all the way down.
So, like Docker Swarm with the stacks, Kubernetes uses pods. Same basic concept. Again,
because each project needs its own name.
Packaging things together and deploying it as a pod. There's benefits to how they deal with that. So they have one thing that Kubernetes sort of pushes forward is config management and dealing with secrets and stuff. So there's a subsystem for that I admittedly haven't had time to play with yet, but it exists. So, Kubernetes.
So you've got another platform in here which I haven't heard of before this podcast.
This one's going to be rough. Okay, so
Rough.
there's another platform. Um, Before I got into Kubernetes, I was, let's just say, assigned the project to roll out a Mesosphere um, container setup, and Mesosphere is a collection of open source projects. And if you've encountered a collection of open source projects in the past, um, oftentimes it gets complicated. Think
Yeah.
OpenStack.
OpenStack, right?
So Mesosphere is, I believe Mesos is from Apache.
Okay.
And Mesos, I believe, was the scheduler. I think that was the big piece, was this crazy scheduler that came from Apache. Again, it's sort of the same thing. It's built on top of Docker. It's got all sorts of fancy stuff. Mesos
Fancy.
has a ton of web interfaces. There's 2 or 3 of them that you can interact with, that you have to interact with in order to manage the system. Now, this is admittedly 6 months old since I've been playing with this. I very much did not like Mesos. We had a lot of problems with it. Just getting it up and running was difficult. We actually had to modify code and write scripts and all sorts of stuff. Other people may have had better luck with it. Your mileage may vary.
Well, like I said, I've never even heard of it before.
Yeah, I was not impressed. I spent far too much time with it. We got it sort of up and running, kind of, maybe, and it sort of deployed containers, but we never got it to the point where we would trust it. And it's, there is a company behind it, that you can pay large amounts of money to get it up and running. But I mean, if we're being honest, Kubernetes, we literally got stood up in like 30 minutes. I mean,
Yeah, Kubernetes seems like
incredibly simple.
It's matured to the point where, I mean, you can practically deploy it in a command or two.
Atomic Linux ships with Kubernetes. Like, I didn't realize it when I first installed Atomic Linux. I thought it was just Docker. Atomic Linux ships with Kubernetes built in. It's already there. You just
it's sort of designed to be a Kubernetes Docker host.
Right.
Because Red Hat is leaning toward OpenShift. OpenShift runs Kubernetes in the background, and Atomic is geared to be a node for OpenShift.
Right. So, like Kubernetes, you have masters and you have, I think they're actually called slaves in Mesosphere. I don't remember. But anyway, so one big difference. Okay, let's step all the way back to Docker Swarm. In Docker Swarm, there is a, I don't remember what word they use. I don't remember if it was leader or there's a node that's designated as like the head node. That's where you would actually interact with the swarm itself.
Also
now,
known as the master.
Right. Well, sort of. Right, because if that goes away, the other swarm nodes kind of take over for that. Like, it just sort of seems to elect a new one. I don't know what the algorithm writing is. So you could actually cut the head off and it still runs. With
like a chicken.
Right. With Kubernetes, the masters are important for deploying new containers and orchestrating, so if something goes down, so much like Rev, if the Rev system were to go offline, the VMs that are running are fine. They're going to continue running. Not a big deal.
Yep.
If a VM goes offline, or if you want to start a new one, now you've got an issue. So as long as there's not an orchestration event that you need to happen, it'll continue running with no problem. In Kubernetes, your master nodes can also run as, maybe it's agents they use, but it can also run as an agent, right? So you can actually run containers on the master node, and they're smaller. They don't have to be like these big powerhouses. In Mesosphere, your masters are masters. End of story. Do not dare try to put anything on the master. Ever.
Well, why would you?
Well, I mean, because I didn't want to have to pay for that many AWS instances.
Oh, you're
It
just being
also
a cheap bastard.
uses, yeah, it's a
S3 Stat has a plan for that.
it's a quorum system, and if you go over, if you don't have an odd number of nodes in the specific configurations that they want, things get really weird and usually don't work. There's, like I said, it gets kind of janky. I was not, I just couldn't trust it. I couldn't get to the point where I could trust it was going to do what it had to do. I have talked to people who swear by it, say it's the best thing ever. I could not get it running to the point where I would trust it. And like I said, Kubernetes, it was, I don't know, like I said, a half hour and I had it up and running. And it was solid enough that I was throwing things at it, and it just kind of kept going, no problem.
Did
Much
you
like
break
Swarm.
anything when you threw stuff at it?
No,
What did you throw at it?
lots of containers.
Containers, like bottles full of liquids. Because computers don't like liquids, man.
Bits.
Bits. Okay.
Containers in the form of bits.
Containers full of bits.
Yes.
Well, I could see how it would be well designed to compensate or to deal with that sort of workload.
Yeah, bits. Yeah, so I Swarm is great. I think if you're learning, it's absolutely the way to go. You're going to get basic orchestration out of that, and it's dead simple to set up. As a small business, if you're running something like this, Swarm is perfectly capable. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't use it.
So what about what about if this is your first foray into container orchestration or containers in general? And
I would
you
play with Swarm.
availability.
Swarm will give you HA. I mean, it's basic,
but with
they'll set it up
with the
for you.
relative simplicity of Kubernetes, or at least the ease to start up a Kubernetes cluster, why not just go right to Kubernetes?
Kubernetes is more complex from a structural standpoint. Yes, it's easy to get it up and running, and there are scripts now that you can just like start these things up with no problem. But there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of different bits and pieces that you have to understand in order to make things run. So, for instance, with Docker Swarm, you can run a Docker container using just the regular Docker commands.
Right.
You would call it a service instead of, you would start a service instead of just running a container. So there's slight differences, but it's still just a quick command line, off you go. With Kubernetes, you're writing YAML files and you have to understand the syntax, and then you have to run those YAML files. And it gets a little bit more complex. It's not unsurmountable by any stretch. But the way that I prefer to learn and the way that I prefer to teach others, start with the basics. Like if you really, really need to know Docker inside and out, if you're going to support a clustered system of any sort that uses Docker, whether that's a Swarm or a Kubernetes cluster or a Mesosphere cluster or whatever.
And honestly, if you're building your containers in the right way and you're putting them into a registry, you could theoretically move from Swarm to Kubernetes or to, I don't know about
you can migrate between
Mesosphere.
these. No, you can absolutely migrate between these very simply. So the container is going to run the same way regardless of which system you're running in.
Right. Because the underlying architecture is still Docker, and it still uses Docker storage and Docker networking and whatnot.
And as long as you have the right connections in place and the ports are exposed in the right way, it'll continue running. It's not like it's going to stop.
Right.
Matter of fact, one of the first setups that we were going to do was set up a swarm, really get to know it intimately, and then use that as a launching point to get us to whatever the next step was, because we could build that new cluster with whatever the software is, and we could expose ports to the swarm system and just move containers over. So if I needed to move the databases over, okay, I'm going to expose the database port in Kubernetes. I'm going to leave my stuff running in Swarm, and I'm going to say, okay, now in order to get to the database, you're going to go here instead and run that database in Kubernetes, and just migrate the containers over.
Right. So in the days of virtualization, it was, oh, well, I started out my infrastructure on VMware, and now I've decided to go with just say Hyper-V. You're talking migration. You're talking VM conversions. You're talking moving a bunch of data. You're talking, because the underlying architecture has changed. Where with Docker, the architecture is still Docker.
Right. In the VM world,
Swarm versus Kubernetes or whatever, right?
Yep. In the VM world, you could theoretically convert a VMware container.
Still meant downtime.
Right. To run with KVM.
Yeah.
If you came and asked me, I would say rebuild it. You could.
Right,
I
exactly.
highly recommend rebuilding the container or the VM.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, I've been through so many VM migrations at this point that.
Oh yeah, yep.
Migrate to a new platform. That's all there is to it. Yep. Take that Zen host and turn it off. Build it on KVM from scratch.
Well, when you went from Zen to KVM, and we're talking like Red Hat Zen, not there's apparently another Zen.
Zen with a lowercase x.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as bad because it was sort of compatible.
Yeah. No, it's.
But if you go from like not Hyper-V to
not to get too off topic from Docker, but we went through a decent amount of VM migrations at the college, and we basically went from we had a VMware system with 2 VMware systems, then we had a Zen cluster. Well, no, we had some standalone Zen boxes, then a Zen cluster, then a KVM cluster, and then finally I unified all of it on Rev,
right?
Which meant all of these 3 disparate systems were still up and running. And I had to figure out how to get all of them into one platform. And I do not regret it for a moment, because finally everything was in one platform. But everything was a migration. The VMware boxes were a conversion, and then a reimplementation, or not a reimplementation, but a conversion of the disk, of the VM definition, and then an import. Same thing with Zen to KVM, same thing with the Zen cluster into KVM, and then, or I should say, all those things from KVM into Rev. With Docker, a Docker container is a Docker container. It doesn't matter what you're orchestrating your containers with. If it's still Docker on the underlying base, there's still enough similarities there that the migration should be much simpler than the conversions that I just described.
Right. Provided you're running on the same CPU type.
Right.
Docker container built on x86 does not run on ARM and vice versa. There are limitations, but yeah. So yeah, the nice part about containers is that they're unbelievably portable, and they're usually pretty small.
That's really the point. The point is that they're supposed to be portable. If you've got an x86 architecture, you can run an x86 container that someone else has put the blood, sweat, and tears into designing, and all you have to do is do a Docker pull and run the darn thing.
Right. So I think the takeaway is, if you're going to play with orchestration, go play with some Docker Swarm, and graduate yourself to Kubernetes. If you like pain, Mesosphere is out there.
Pain.
Look, it was pretty. I wanted to like it. I couldn't. We just could not get it to work efficiently and the way we wanted to. And the amount of time that we spent on it compared to other systems, Swarm and Kubernetes combined, is just too much. So it's there to play with. I highly recommend really learning how containers work and how to build them and what exactly is going on, in order to move forward with learning more with the orchestration and everything else.
Right.
Just saying like, oh, I'm just going to build a container, throw it out there is doing yourself a disservice. Really, really get to know how that works and what you're doing and what exactly is going on, because you can make better containers that way. And you can get these things pretty small and really damn quick.
Yep. All right. So I think that covers the orchestration layer at this point. I think we'll cover a couple of the platform as a service applications that you can run on top of your orchestration platform, like Rancher and OpenShift. And I'm sure there's others out there that I'm not aware of. We'll cover them maybe in the next episode. It depends on how long it takes for us to really look into them. Because of the whole voice incident, we're going to be recording again just a week from today. So we may not have, I don't know, Jason, if you've got enough information already to talk intelligently about OpenShift. But we've got Rancher to cover. We've also got things like Amazon's ECS, their Elastic Container Service, that I really wanted to cover. So these may take a little bit of research before we can really talk about them in any way that's really going to be beneficial for you guys. So we'll cover it as we can, and we'll keep up with the Docker theme, I think, for the next couple of weeks. We've also got coming up, I'd have to look at the date again, but it's a couple weeks from now, I believe. We've got John coming back to talk about OpenStack. He promised to come back, I believe it was early September, to talk about more OpenStack stuff and deployment and whatnot with his information, or with his involvement in the Triple O project. So I look forward to that. Like I said, I think it was early or mid-September, so that should be coming up soon. So, all right. Unless you got any other thoughts you wanted to throw in there about Docker, Jason, or you pretty much covered it?
No, I think we've beaten that one to death.
Yeah, I think we're good.
we'll pull the next version and deploy it later.
Yeah. All right, folks. If you want to find us online, look at ironsysadmin.com. If you want to give us money, which again, thank you to all of the Patreon donors that we've got, patreon.com/ironsysadmin. As I mentioned before, that money is already directly going to benefit the show. And we're very grateful for anything you can give us, whether it's, a couple cents to 10, 15, 20 bucks, whatever.
I can use all the cents I can get.
All the cents you can get. Pretty much, I think once we've covered hosting fees and whatnot, we're just going to start using it to buy beer to drink on the show. Does that sound good?
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Free beer on Monday nights, every other Monday night. So yeah, facebook.com/ironsysadmin, and also on Twitter, twitter.com/ironsysadmin. You can find us. You can find our YouTube channel. If you're listening to us audio only, you can watch us live on YouTube on the nights that we record, or you can watch us afterward. Of course, this is it remains on YouTube. ironsysadmin.com/YouTube.
We need a Patreon tier where we can get you to dance.
Get me to dance?
Sure.
You don't want to see me dance.
What? I just want to see if it's possible.
I may fall and hurt myself.
I will fall on myself, but
All right. And the usual places you can find podcasts: on Apple Podcasts, which was formerly known as Apple iTunes. They decided to rebrand that for some reason. And Stitcher, because, Stitcher. Why not? Right? All right. So I think I've covered all those.
I still haven't figured out the Apple Podcasts thing.
Well, I mean, it's direct, right?
I don't know. Is it? It doesn't say Apple Podcasts anywhere that I normally go, so I'm at a loss.
All right. So it's either Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts, depending on what time zone you're living in.
Okay. All right. You can find me on Twitter at Xenophage.
Yep. And you can find me at Gangriff on Twitter as well. All right. So I think we've covered everything tonight. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks, everyone on YouTube, for tuning in, which I think equates to one person. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Tony.
All right. Good night, everyone. All right. Awesome. So Tony, if you're still listening, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for adding in your heckling on the chat.
He's only there to pick on you, apparently.
He is. I'm sure that's what he's there for. I pick on him during his show, so you know. All right, I think we can end the broadcast and we can get this thing processed. All right, thanks everyone
Yay,
who's on
processing.
YouTube. Yay, processing. Good night, everybody.